One. There it is. Welcome, everybody. We have another awesome, fun guest. We are going to talk about powerfully ending relationships, and then we're going to see wherever else it might go. We are going to have a great time today, like always, so tune in.
Practicing Polyamory, real-life perspectives from the imperfect people of polyamory. The mission of the Practicing Polyamory podcast is to provide a platform for all of the real-life, flawed humans that practice polyamory so that we might all learn from one another and grow as a community. Enjoy the show.
All right, here we go. Welcome, everybody, to this beautiful sunny day. Oh, I love living in San Diego. Sorry for everybody that's not having a sunny day. But hey, can't everybody be here in San Diego? Anyway, before we jump in and chat with our awesome guests, I want to quickly remind everybody to please follow the show everywhere on social media, especially Facebook and Instagram, where I'm most active, but we're everywhere at Practicing Polya. I'm even doing TikTok now, so Practicing Polya, that's where you can find me. Best way to support the show, best free way to support the show, and speaking of free ways to support the show, the really best is to share it far and wide, encourage others to subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, wherever it is that you download your podcasts. My goal is to get to 40,000 subscribers, and I know that I can do it with your help. So if you find value in what we're doing, please share it with your polycule, share it with your poly Facebook groups, share it with your poly friends, your chosen family, all over the interwebs. And lastly, and as always, I want to remind you, if you are listening to this podcast, you're a welcome guest to be on this show. If you are actively polyam curious, or a professional serving the polyamorous community, you are welcome, and I want to hear your story. If you are disabled, BIPOC, pan, bi, demi, gay, straight, sex worker, kinkster, queer, lesbian, trans, NB, arrow, ace, we are accepting of all. We want to hear all of your stories. Your stories are the ones that we want to hear, because the more stories we hear, the more the world learns about us, the more representation we have, the better we can serve our community. So go to practicingpolyamory.com and sign up today. All right, that is my spiel, everybody. As always, best part of the show, let's introduce our guest. Our guest today has been working with families for nearly 20 years in both traditional and non-traditional settings. She's been a life coach, an educator, and the founder of the only school for self-directed learning in a working democracy in the entire state of Utah. As a coach, she's helped people overcome relationship struggles, build and run successful businesses, create meaningful life goals, and climb out of debt. As a certified family life educator, she's helped individuals and families find ideal relationships, prepare for marriage, plan for children, and powerfully end relationships. So that'll be interesting. Our guest is passionate about transforming families and people's lives to empower them to live a life that they love. I'm excited to dive in with this awesome guest who's joining us today from Third Eye Family Solutions out of Utah. Welcome to the show, Dr. Jen Schwartz. There we go.
There we
Dr.
go.
Jen. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. And actually, I did professionally put on raves for a couple of years too, so that was a very appropriate clip.
Nice.
It's a long time ago, but yeah.
I want to hear that story just real quick. I mean, let's start with that. Putting on raves to getting your doctorate's degree. What's that journey like?
Right. Well, and the million steps before, after, and in between too. No, for a little while, I was an office manager at an audio technology company. And what we did was we produced binaural beat technology, which helps sync the brain into different brain states. And usually people use that for things like relaxation and sleep. And we looked at using it for an alert state and a meditative state. And we put it under dance music, and we put on several raves as part of what we did with the binaural beats, and had that running as part of the music the whole time, and just created really amazing experiences for people. So that was a long time ago. Let's see, my kids, my oldest kids are 21 and 19 now, and I think they were 3 and 1 at the time. So it's been a minute, but it was a lot of fun.
Seems like it was kind of the beginnings of your career. And so getting from there to deciding to get your doctorate degree and open up this family solutions practice where you help people to achieve their lifelong goals. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Absolutely. Well, I originally was an elementary school teacher even before I had kids. And then I went into alternative education. As you mentioned, from my bio, we actually started a private school here in Utah that was about self-directed education, which is not something most people even know about, much less get to experience in their lifetime. I love doing that. I went on and got a master's degree in education and had a lot of fun playing in there, but I always knew that there was more that I wanted to do outside the educational realm. And I ended up deciding to get a doctorate, thinking it would be more related to what I was doing in education. And it took a total left turn. I went in and did my research in the spiritual experience of giving birth,
Mm-hmm.
and talked to birthing people about their experiences doing that and how it changed them as a person. From there, I ended up going into counseling and then opened a private practice about 2 years ago, coming up on 2 years. And I've just been doing that ever since. And, one of the amazing things a few years back, so to kind of get it into the theme of what you're all about, right?
Yep. Yep.
I
That
had
was going to be
several
my next
polyamorous,
question. Don't
yeah,
worry.
I had several polyamorous clients, and I have my own poly story, which I'm sure we'll get into as well. But I saw an article in, I believe it was even Psychology Today, that said the top 10 ways you're actually hurting your polyamorous clients rather than helping them. And I thought, ooh, I better read this, right? I have all these poly clients. I better make sure I'm not screwing people up, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I started to read the article and I realized I'm actually not doing any of these things. And I wasn't
Oh.
doing them because I lived for 4 years as part of a polyamorous quad. I know the world. I know, what it's like to be in all of those different positions, the good, the bad, the ugly, the
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. And I wasn't doing those things that therapists and counselors who haven't had the personal experience do. The judgment in the back of your head where you're like, well, gosh, if you were just monogamous, you wouldn't even be having this problem.
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
don't have that judgment in the back of my head because I don't expect monogamy from everyone. So it was really great. And it actually opened me up to then marketing myself as someone who works with the poly community.
Mm-hmm,
And of
mm-hmm.
course, as soon as you do that, your name gets around really fast because there's not a whole lot of people out there who are poly friendly, not to mention actually have their own life experience that they can relate to you from.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, that's how I found you is through the polyfriendly.org website,
Yep.
marketing yourself that way. So it is a minority. Even though there are a ton of names there, it is still a minority and not everybody is polyfriendly. So you were in a quad.
Yes. Yep.
Tell me about that experience. When did that happen? Your kids, you said the oldest are 21 and 19. So I'm assuming that they were around when this was going on.
They absolutely were. So my former husband and I, we got divorced about, I think we're at about 8 years or so now. So we're looking at 14 years ago. Actually, when he and I first got together, which was in 2001, we were polyamorous from the beginning.
Okay.
Like many people who start as a couple and declare themselves polyamorous, that meant a lot of different things over the years. Sometimes it meant that we had other casual relationships. Other times it meant that we had more serious relationships. And at a particular point where we were is living with, so I had my husband and my boyfriend and my husband's girlfriend. And among us, we had 12 kids. So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was, and 6 of them were like full time with us all the time. And the other 6 were back and forth with other parents, with all the blended families there. So, it was quite the ride. 12 kids is a lot of kids. Even when it's only 6 at home, that's still a lot of kids.
It is. Was this in Utah?
It was in Utah, right?
Okay.
Which, of course, it was really interesting. We ended up buying a house. The house that my husband and I had lived in was not really suitable for 4 adults and 6 to 12 kids. So we ended up buying a house and remodeling it to make it more friendly for our family. And we lived next door to polygamists. It was really interesting. One day, a couple of the men who lived there, so there was 3 wives who lived there, and their husband had passed away. And so there were other men. There was a brother of one of the wives and some other uncles and cousins, but just various men who were around to take care of these women and all the kids. And 2 of the men came over one day and they wanted to ask us what scripture we were following because they knew that we were a quad. and how that was different from the scripture they followed. And we're like, there's no scripture involved, honey, but thank you for asking. Very
Oh, that's
entertaining
great.
conversation.
That's great.
And we had a lot of fun with that. It's something we still joke about, all of us, to this day. So
Yeah, yep. So you are not together with them anymore, but you've managed to stay friends.
well, absolutely. So my boyfriend at the time is my husband now. So
Oh,
we
okay.
have stayed together. And so, you know, when you look at it, the idea of ending relationships, right? In a polyamorous situation, you know, one relationship might be ending, but what does that mean for everyone else?
Mhm.
So in our case, what that meant is my husband and his girlfriend were together for several years after my husband and I split. They're no longer together, but my boyfriend and I, like I said, he's now my husband. We've been married for about 2.5 years. And we've been together for 11.5 years. So, and there's a lot of overlap there always, right? It's always
Mhm,
funny to
mhm.
me when I tell people the timelines of how old kids are. And, oh yeah, you know, Joe and I have been together for 11.5 years. They're like, wait a minute, but you and Craig have only been divorced for 8 years. So how did that work? Right. So, it brings on some interesting conversations, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious. So I know that we talked about powerfully ending relationships, but I don't get a lot of people that talk openly about their families, and especially when it comes with children. So I'm kind of gonna detour and go this direction because I
You
feel like
bet.
that might be a little bit more interesting. I mean, especially in this situation where you actually have like this whole quad, and you end up changing partners. So what was that experience like? I you can't necessarily speak for your kids, but how do you see from your perspective that it has affected them?
Yeah. I mean, it's really different for every person, right? So, the youngest child of all the kids is my current husband, and I have an 8-year-old son.
Hmm.
And he was born during that time where we were all living together and all the kids were there. And one of my favorite photos of that is my child, who's now, so I have two kids who are non-binary. So one of them's 14 now, and they were 6 when their little brother was born. So my 6-year-old at the time, and then my former husband, who was my husband at the time, right? His girlfriend's daughter, who was 7 at the time. And I have a picture of the two of them standing there, you know, moments after the 8-year-old was born. And they both
Hmm.
have these looks on their faces that are like, just these
My
and
gosh.
literally they both had their hands to their faces, right? And just most astonished looks. And it was a wonderful thing to get to share, you know, having not just my partner there with me for the birth, but also my husband who'd been there when our two kids had been born,
Hmm.
and my husband's partner who'd also had 4 home births. And we were, you know, everybody's there. And, you know, it affected all the kids differently is the basic answer to your question.
Yeah.
We have, so the little girl in the picture who was 7 at the time, she's 15 now. She and my 14-year-old and she and my 19-year-old are still very, very close.
Hmm.
They spend a lot of time together. You know, she's always welcome in our home. She's kind of considered another one of our kids, even though
Right.
she's not really connected in any way at any point in time. A couple of the older kids had a much harder time with it. And of course they would, right? The little kids are like, oh, we're doing this now? Great. This is fun. I get to have more kids around. I get to have more adults that can help me. I have,
Hmm.
you know, if I need a snack and mom's not available, guess what? I got 3 other adults I can go to. It's
Right.
fine. Um, you know, for the older kids, it was harder. I think, like I said, some adjusted better than others, both adjusted to having the quad and then to not having the quad. And I think that, you know, I've had with my own kids in particular, I've had a lot of conversations about what was that like for you, you know?
Hmm.
So my oldest is 21. They got married a couple years ago. Also, that's the other non-binary ones, my 21-year and 14-year-old.
Hmm.
Uh, so my 21-year-old got married a few years ago, and it wasn't too much longer after that that their other partner moved in with them. And they were living in a triad for 2.5 years. Um, and then my child and their spouse have separated, but they're both still in relationship with the third person that was in their triad. So
Separately.
Yes, right. So like all kinds of messy, but also beautiful and wonderful things. So, they had told me from the time they were very little, and I think it's because they saw me in many different relationships and different formations. They said, when I grow up, I want to have, whatever the numbers were, I want to have 5 wives and 3 husbands, and we're all going to live in a big house together. I'm like, great, go for it, kids.
Cool.
That'd be too big of a community for me personally, but if that works for you, go for it. So I think, in a lot of senses, it's like anything with kids. For us, we normalized it.
Right.
We didn't, and we never had the kinds of conversations that might have to happen in some families of, don't tell so and so. For whatever reason, we don't tell so and so about mommy's other boyfriend, right?
Right.
And we were really fortunate that we never really had to have those kind of conversations with our kids. So they never had to keep a secret. They never had to feel like, oh, maybe something's wrong about this. It was always just, this is the way it is. Mommy loves lots of people, and so does daddy, and so does my stepdaddy, and so does my stepdaddy's girlfriend. And we all just love lots of people.
It's all love. It's all about love. That's what it's really all about. And, as you're talking, I'm just thinking of, it is, I've read and I listened to the Polyamorists Next Door. I had Dr. Chef on the show, and she's written a whole lot about it. So, there's a lot of information just in there, but I haven't actually had an opportunity to talk to somebody that's, lived the life for, 11 years.
Well, so we were 4 years in that quad, but like I said, my ex-husband and I were together for 13 years. So 13 years in living polyamorous. When my ex-husband and I separated, my partner and I at the time decided that we were going to spend some time being monogamous, and we've continued to do so. It just, there hasn't been any pull for either of us to do things differently. So I would say 13 years of polyamory, and all of that with kids in the mix, because I already had one son when I came into that relationship. Yeah.
Super interesting. I love it. I had a question and then it disappeared on me. I hate it when that happens, especially on a live show. It's one of those things. It's like you can't edit it out. So as I'm sitting here thinking, so going back, it was 13 years. You said that you and your husband actually started out polyamorous.
Yep.
And did you know of the term beforehand? Did you kind of learn it as you went? What was that? How did that start?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it was so long ago. How did that start in 2020? It was 20 years ago now, right? Because that was 2001. I think, we had both come from, we were both married before. We each had one child from our prior marriages. And neither of us really had the pull to just couple, like coupling wasn't what we wanted to do, but we also knew we wanted to be together. So it wasn't that we necessarily knew it, like, oh yeah, that polyamory thing, let's go do that. I don't think that at the time we even knew the term in the very, very beginning. We found it pretty quickly. Someone I talked to at some point in time said, oh, you should read The Ethical Slut. Okay. And we did. And it started to learn various things about the community. And there was a wonderful blog. And again, we're talking 20 years ago, but it was written by a woman, and she had 2 male partners, and they had a bunch of kids, 6 or 7 kids, and no clarity or reason for clarity around which man was the father of which child. The 3 of them just had a bunch of kids together, right? And it was a really beautiful and inspiring blog. And I loved reading about their communication and how they dealt with one another. And both of the men were bisexual as well. So it was very much a triangle triad, right? Not a V. They just have this beautiful family. And I was like, that's what I want right there. That's the thing I want. We went about things a little differently, and things ended up looking different than where then her real life, right? Her life was her life. Our life was going to be our life. But the more we stepped out, there was actually a polyamory support group at the Utah Pride Center, even 20 years ago. And, we went to a few meetings there and met some people there and got to just learn. I don't know. It's sort of that general learning process, right? Of going, Oh, okay. I mean, I didn't know the difference between a triangle and a V relationship when that
Hmm.
started. And then that was something I learned, like, oh, okay, I can see how these can be, there's all different ways to form this, right? And
Right.
the beautiful thing about polyamory is it's not one thing. Like monogamy is one thing. It's two partners together without anybody else. Polyamory is like this whole wide range of what does that mean? What does that look like? And most importantly, what works for you? What
Hmm.
works for you and your family?
And a lot of opportunity for that to change and to grow. And, it could be a V today and tomorrow it could be a W, or,
Right.
whatever. Like there's a lot of different things. So I remembered what I wanted to ask you, and it was
Yeah.
about the subject that we picked, which was powerfully ending relationships. You ended that relationship with your first husband, and
Mhm.
maintained the friendship. And you were telling me about your child who ended a relationship there, but they're able to maintain uh, at least part of that. It wasn't a full triangle anymore, but at least it stayed a V.
Yeah.
So when it comes to powerfully ending relationships, what are some of the things that maybe you tell your clients that you, I assume, learned from personal experience?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I learned from personal experience, and of course, I also have a whole lot of training and education, right?
Hmm.
So it's
Hmm.
kind of hard to say what came from where, but I think the biggest thing, and I'm actually working on some folks. We're working on a book or a workshop. We're not quite sure what it's going to end up being. One of those projects right now, about parenting after divorce, right? But
Okay.
it's this same topic, which is when relationships end, it's hard. It
Yes.
just is. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if it's a relationship where it's just you and one person and you never have to have contact with them again and you go your separate ways, or you're entangled in this giant quad of a family with 12 kids and you've got all these people to attend to. It's hard. And I think that the biggest thing that I've learned in the research and the work we've been doing is I had this pull to want to say, how can we not have that stage where we're angry? How can we bypass that and not be
Mm.
pissed off at the other person and just want to hurt them and, like all those things? And the thing I've really come to is I don't think we can. I think it's
Oh.
part of the process. Part of the process is just like any process of grief, right?
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
think of those stages of grief we've all heard of. Well, guess what? One of them's anger.
Right.
And, when someone dies, it's not usually anger at the person, it's usually anger at the world, or it might be anger at the medical system that let the person down, or whatever it
Sure.
is. And when you're ending a relationship, that anger is usually with the person that the relationship was with.
Hmm.
So, given that it's inevitable to a degree, how can we handle it? Right? Because that's the most important part is, you've got to let yourself go through that anger and feel it. But that doesn't mean you have to actually lash out. You don't have to hurt the person. You don't have to burn bridges. You don't have to say something that you later regret and have to fix and, all of that kind of stuff. So it becomes more about appropriately managing the anger rather than trying to not have it. And that's
Appropriately
really,
managing it.
yeah, exactly. And that's really the biggest thing that I deal with. And again, it's with monogamous couples who are divorcing. It's the same conversation we have in all of those. Like, you're going to be angry. So how can you let yourself be angry without it hurting anyone else?
I imagine that there are circumstances where that's easier than other times. I mean, if a cheating situation, there's a lot of
Yep.
hurt feelings, there's a lot of betrayal. It's really, really difficult to not be angry, as opposed to, we just incompatible for some other reason, right? Like we just,
Right.
I don't know, whatever. So are those, when we have those different degrees, are there different steps? Are there different ways? Are there different strategies to try and manage that anger and not let it take complete hold?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a great way to look at it, right? Because you are right. In the case of cheating, the person you might be angry with might not be your partner. You might be more angry with whoever they cheated with than you are with your actual partner, right? Um, and yeah, sometimes we're just not compatible. That's the reality of life. Not
Hmm.
everybody's going to be partners for life, right? I think the most important thing, and this especially comes in when you're talking about polyamory, is finding a person where in a space where you can fully express that anger, but not have it hurt people, right? So, in the case of, like I said, my child and that relationship, the person that he expresses the anger to doesn't get to be the other partner, because that partner is still in relationship with the spouse,
Right.
right? So, that's like going to somebody and going, oh my gosh, your mom did da 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 da. And like, you want to go, hold on, and defend your mom.
Right.
It's the
Right.
same thing, right? So if you're in a polyamorous relationship, don't express that anger with any of the partners. You got to find some space outside that relationship. Also expressing anger in a way that's more like, using nonviolent communication techniques, for example, when you are talking to the partner that you're ending the relationship with, and saying, I'm so angry that you fill in the blank with whatever it was that happened. And what I need from you right now is to have you not talk to me for the next 2 weeks so that I can go handle this on my own. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go find somebody who is a good listening ear, whether that's another friend, whether that's your therapist, whether that's, your diary, if you don't have anybody else to talk to and you just want to journal it yourself. Go to a rage room and break things. I mean, there's lots of ways to do it, but don't do it in your polycule. It's not the place for it.
That's not the place for it. That's fantastic advice right there. I mean, I've fallen into that trap, where something's going wrong with one partner and I just go talking to my other partner about it. I feel like that's who I'm supposed to talk to about it. And I mean, if they're not in a relationship with my other partner, is that okay?
I mean, again, it really depends on your relationship, right? So if you're talking about something with the intention of working through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to your other partner and you're like, man, I'm having a really hard time with so and so. I just don't know how to manage this thing. And you're there and you say, I just need you to listen, and they listen and you're done, great. Or if you say, I really need some suggestions, I want to hear what your suggestions are, and they give you some suggestions and you go put them into practice, great. But if you're there to bitch and moan, I hope I can say that on the live
That's fine. You're
broadcast.
good.
If you're there to whine and moan, it's not the place for it, right? Because all you're doing in that situation is you're denigrating the listening of the person you're talking about to the person you're talking to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, you're just making that other person look bad. And then,
Yep.
later when you're like, oh yeah, I love this person so much, and your other partner's like, well, I don't know why, because the other day you told me they were such a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you get into some messy stuff.
Yep. Want to just thank this commenter. We needed this discussion right now. Relationships are hard. I describe my past relationships as a tornado of emotion.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the things that we fall into when, when we don't have the tools like you're talking about, when we, and especially like what you were just saying, where you're talking badly about one partner to the other, and we get into that situation, like you mentioned, where the very next day you're like, oh, I love them so much, but wait, hang on, yesterday.
Right.
And that's that roller coaster, right? That's the tornado. Yep. That's all of those things that just messes us up. So if we're going to be venting to someone, I mean, but and our emotions are going to change, right? If our emotions change, I mean, that's kind of the reaction that we're going to get from anybody that we're talking to.
Yeah.
So maybe should we even, I don't know. I'm kind of lost right there. I'm kind of like, what do we do?
Yeah, well, it's not that venting is bad, right? Sometimes venting is what we need. One of the things I teach my clients a lot is, if you are going to vent, give yourself a time limit.
Okay.
Like literally say, I need 5 minutes to vent, or I need 10 minutes to vent, and set a timer. And when the timer goes off, stop. Because really, you don't need to vent for an hour. I promise. It might feel like it, but the only thing you're doing then is you're fueling the negativity for yourself and whoever's listening, right? So 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes if it's a really big thing you need to vent about. And then when the timer goes off, stop venting, take a couple deep breaths. And then you can either just turn to the person you were venting to and say, thank you so much. Or you can turn and say, did you hear anything in there where I might be off? Because I feel like maybe there's something I can do in this situation to make things better that I'm missing. right? Or
Hmm.
what advice would you have for me in the situation that you just heard?
I mean, it's really easy if we ask those kinds of questions to like fall into a trap of allowing that conversation to continue, and then like that venting session, I get the advice or I get the reaction from whoever it is that I'm talking to, and then it's like, "Oh, but hang on, let me tell you this." And it
Right.
becomes another, you know, another roller coaster, another round in the spiral. So would maybe like we get that feedback and we just say, okay, we're just going to take the feedback and not respond.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, it might be if you come up against something and somebody goes, "Oh, well, here, I suggest you do this." And you're like, "Well, I tried that. It didn't work." You could either just, like you said, say thank you and move on, or you could say, "I tried that. It didn't work. Do you have anything else? You got any other ideas here?"
Hmm.
And see if you can actually, I think the biggest thing is, especially when it comes to things like venting, we get into cycles of wanting to complain versus wanting to fix a problem, right?
Mm,
Like actually address what's going on. I mean, if you're having a problem in a relationship, whatever relationship it is, and you're not committed to doing anything about it, well, then you better get used to it and decide not to be upset about it, because you're kind of making a conscious decision then to
yeah.
just deal with the problem. So if you can get yourself past, and what you just said is perfect, right? It's like, well, you could try this, and you go, oh yeah, I tried that. You want to know what happened when I tried that? Let me tell you this, right? Just
Hmm.
get you back into another spiral, and you're still not doing anything to address the issue at hand.
I do love the idea though of giving myself 5 minutes, and like I'm imagining myself like going to a friend and being like, okay, look, I need 5 minutes, right? And
Yeah.
don't take anything that I say seriously, like just take it with a grain of salt, and I just need to like let it rip and just like this mother and this bit and
Yep.
then and just like rip into that person and like, okay, I let it all go. I feel better
Right.
now.
Yep.
I didn't mean any of what I said. I mean, I did, but I didn't. But
Sure.
I just needed to get it out,
Yeah, it's
and
those
now it's
moments where
out.
you're not watching your words, right? You need that
Yeah.
minute to not have to be like speak carefully or any of that, just like vomit, right? And get it
Yes.
over with.
Yes.
But by the way, the same technique works when you're having a problem in your relationship. In your relationship, you can go to somebody, you go to one of your partners and say, "I have a concern and I need to talk to you, and I would like 5 minutes to speak and just be heard." Right?
Hmm.
Now, you don't want to vomit during that kind of conversation. You want to be a little more responsible with what you're saying and how you're saying it, but you can also just say, I really need to be heard, right? And same thing, set a timer, right? My husband
Hmm.
and I do this all the time. I do this with my kids sometimes when they're like, and I'll say, I've got an issue that I want to talk to you about, but I limit myself so that I don't then end up going on and on about all the nuances of why there's a problem there. And I'm talking about my adult kids, not the 8-year-old, but
Yeah. Gotcha.
um and then you give yourself that 5 minutes to speak about whatever it is that's on your mind that's bothering you. um Give your partner a chance to respond and say, okay, well, here's what I heard you're upset about the dishes, and you're upset about that date I went on, and these are the things that are bothering you. And then you got to turn around and give them the grace of giving them the 5 minutes to speak as well, not as like a rebuttal, but as a chance for them to also communicate.
Nice. Equal
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yep, exactly.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, Dr. Jen, we are a little bit past our time, which is cool. I asked you beforehand, so we're
Yep,
good.
no worries.
Um, I wanted to ask you though, is there anything that I missed? Is there anything that you wish that I had
Hmm.
asked? Or if not, then just some final thoughts that you would want to leave with our audience today.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you and I could probably talk for 3 or 4 hours. They're really long podcasts and hard to keep other people's attention, but we'd probably enjoy it. No, I think, the only thing I would say is, and I think most listeners who've had any experience in polyamory would know this already, but polyamory is hard. Relationships are hard enough.
Hmm. Hmm.
And when you add in multiple relationships, it's not just, oh, now I have to communicate with 2 people or 3 people, but they often need to communicate with each other. And, human beings just aren't that great at communication for the most part.
Hmm.
So you now have 4 complicated communication pathways, or 6 communicated, right? Whatever it is.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
It adds
and
up.
it's not for everyone for that reason. In my opinion, the level of communication it takes is really something that many people struggle with.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes it's easier to be monogamous. And I don't say that to talk anyone out of anything, because I would not trade my experiences for the world. And I certainly don't tell any of my poly clients that they shouldn't be, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, the communication is tough. And I think if you're really struggling with communicating, even just with your single partner, your multiple partners, your V, your triad, your quad, your whatever you've got going on, finding someone who is supportive of your relationships, who can listen and support everyone equally in communicating, is the best thing you can do for everyone involved. So there's my final word.
There you go.
Yeah.
And one final word from one of our listeners, Sandy. Great being with you, Jen. Thanks for supporting people like you do.
Awesome. Love you, Sandy. She's a good friend.
I love it. It's perfect. Well, thank you, Dr. Jen, again, so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate your time. It's been great. It's been fun.
Great. Thank you so much.
And thank you, as always, to our live audience as well for tuning in. As a reminder, when we're live, you don't get any commercial interruptions, but the same cannot be said for those podcast downloads. So if you want to avoid the commercial interruptions, be sure to catch us live right here, Monday through Wednesday, 2:30 Pacific time, or sign up for Patreon where you get access to our commercial-free RSS feed and support the show. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, wherever it is you download those podcasts if you haven't already, and leave us a review. We'll really appreciate it. Leave comments, leave hearts and likes and all that good stuff. Y'all are awesome. Thank you again so much. And until next time.
Have a nice day! Thank you for tuning in to the Practicing Polyamory podcast. Would you or someone in your polycule like to be a guest? Sign up at practicingpolyamory.com and join the conversation. Please support us by subscribing, liking, and following us on social media at Practicing Polya by clicking any of the affiliate links on our website or by subscribing at patreon.com/practicing